He built the house of the forest of Lebanon. It was 150 feet long, 75 feet wide, 45 feet high, and 4 rows of cedar pillars with cedar beams on top of the pillars. It was paneled above the cedar at the top of the chambers that rested on 45 pillars, 15 per row. There were 3 rows of window frames facing each other in 3 tiers. All the other doors and doorposts had rectangular frames, the openings facing each other in 3 tiers. He made the hall of pillars 75 feet long, 45 feet wide. A portico was in front of the pillars, and a canopy with pillars was in front of them. He made the hall of the throne where he would judge, the hall of judgment. It was paneled with cedar from the floor to the rafters. Solomon's own palace where he would live. In the other courtyard behind the hall was a similar construction, and he made a house like this hall of Pharaoh's daughter, his wife. All of these buildings were of costly stones cut to size and sawed with saws on the inner and outer surfaces, from foundation to coping and from the outside to the great courtyard. The foundation was made of large, costly stones, 12 and 15 feet long. Above were also costly stones cut to size, as well as cedar wood around the great courtyard, as well as the inner courtyard of the Lord's temple and the portico of the temple, were 3 rows and dressed in stone, and a row of trimmed cedar beams. King Solomon had Hiram brought from Tyre. He was a widow's son from the tribe of Naphtali, and his father was a man of Tyre, a bronze craftsman. Hiram had great skills, understanding, and knowledge to do everything kind of bronze work. So he came to King Solomon and carried out his work. He cast 2 bronze pillars, each 27 feet high and 18 feet in circumference. He also made 2 capitals of cast bronze to set on top of the pillars. 7.5 feet was the height of the first capital, and 7.5 feet was also the height of the second capital. The capitals on top of the pillars had gratings of lattice work, rests made of chain work, 7 for the first capital and 7 for the second. He made the pillars with 2 encircling rows of pomegranates on the ongoing granting to cover the capital on top. He did the same for the second capital, and the capitals on top of the pillars in the portico were shaped like lilies, 6 feet high. The capitals on the 2 pillars were also immediately above the rounded surface next to the granting, and 200 pomegranates were in rows encircling each capital. He set up the pillars at portico of the sanctuary. He set up the right pillar and named it Jashin. Then he set up the left pillars and named it Boaz. The top of the pillars were shaped like lilies. Then the work of the pillars came completed. He made the cast metal basin 15 feet from brim to brim, perfectly round. It was 7.5 feet high, 45 feet in circumference. Ornamental gourds encircled it below the brim, 10 every half yard, completely encircled the basin. The gourds were cast into rows when the basin was cast. It stood on 12 oxen, 3 facing north, 3 facing west, 3 facing south, and 3 facing east. The basin was on top of them, and all their hindquarters were toward the center. The basin was 3 inches thick, and its rim was fashioned like the brim of a cup of a lily blossom. It held 11,000 gallons. Then he made 10 bronze water carts. Each water cart was 6 feet long, 6 feet wide, and 4.5 feet high. This was the design of the carts. They had frames. The frames were between the cross pieces, and on the frames between the cross pieces were lions, oxen, and cherubim. On the cross piece there was a pedestal above, and below the lions and oxen were rests of hanging work. Each cart had 4 bronze wheels with bronze axles. Underneath the 4 corners of the basin were cast supports, each next to a wreath, and the water cart's opening inside the crown on top was 18 inches wide. The opening was round, made a pedestal 27 inches wide. On it were carvings, but their frames were square, not round. There were four wheels under the frames, and the wheel axles were part of the water cart. Each wheel was 27 inches tall. The wheel's design was similar to the chariot wheels. Their axle rims, spoke, and hubs were all cast of metal. Four supports were at all four corners of each water cart, and support was one piece with the water cart. At the top of the cart was a band 9 inches high encircling it. Also, at the top of the cart, its braces and its frames were one piece with it. He engraved cherubim lions, palm trees on the plates of its braces and on its frames, wherever each had space with encircling wreaths. In this way, he made the 10 water carts using the same casting dimensions and shape for all of them. Then he made 10 bronze basins. Each basin had 220 gallons, and each was 60 feet wide. One basin for each of the 10 water carts. He set 5 water carts on the right side of the temple and 5 on the left side. He put the basin near the right side of the temple toward the southeast. Then Hiram made the basins and shovels and the sprinkling basins. So Hiram finished all the work that he was doing for King Solomon on the Lord's temple. 2 pillar bowls for the capitals that were on top of 2 pillars, the 2 granting for covering both bowls of the capitals that were on top of the pillars, the 400 pomegranates for the 2 gratings, 2 rows of pomegranates for each grating, covering both capital bowls on top of the pillars, then 10 water carts, 10 basins of the water carts, the basin, the 12 oxen underneath the basin, and the pots, shovels, and sprinkling basins. All the utensils that Hiram made for King Solomon at the Lord's temple were made of burnished bronze. The king had them cast in clay molds in the Jordan Valley between Succoth and Zarethan. Solomon left all the utensils unweighed because there were so many. The weight of the bronze was not determined. Solomon also made all the equipment in the Lord's temple, the gold altar, the gold table, the bread of the presence was placed on the pure gold lampstands in front of the inner sanctuary, 5 on the right, 5 on the left. The golden flowers, lamps, tongues, the pure gold ceremonial bowls, wick trimmers, sprinkling basin, ladles, and fire pans, and gold hinges of the doors of the inner temple, that is the most holy place, and for the doors of the temple sanctuary. So all the work King Solomon did in the Lord's temple was complete. Then Solomon brought in the consecrated things of his father David, the silver, the gold, and the utensils, and put them in the treasury of the Lord's temple.